Hi, Dave Specter here in Chicago, and this is another episode of our Shelter in Place Blues from the Inside In podcast, and really glad to have as our guest this evening Rick Holmstrom in California. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing very well, considering. I mean, on the upside of it, I've got daughters who are 17 and 13, so while we're kind of going crazy at the beginning, trying to figure out how this was all going to work, and with my wife home working, uh, the good thing about it is I'm not in airports or hotels right now. I mean, I really miss playing. I miss Mavis and the band,
Yeah,
and but to be able to spend all this time, especially with all the touring that we do, has been a godsend in a way.
yeah. What was the last gig you guys played?
We were in Adelaide, Australia. It was the last date of our Australian tour. And that was, I'm going to guess, like March 9th or 10th. And then I got home and I had a couple days off at home. And then I had a gig in San Diego, a blues gig, outdoor patio gig, just a lot of fun. A lot of friends showed up and everything. And I had a gig with James Harmon lined up the next week and at a trio gig also. And then all of a sudden it just went, woo!
Oh, man.
But the last gig that we played was the WOMAD Festival in Adelaide with Mavis, and it was fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm still kind of high from that one.
yeah, I bet. So you've been Mavis's guitarist and band leader now for 13 years, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. And I kind of want to, well, full disclosure, Rick is one of my favorite guitar players on the planet. So I'm, I just want to let people know that. And I've had a lot of great guests, and I don't say that about everyone. But I love your style and your tone and your approach and your energy. And it's totally unique and original, and that's what it's all about. You don't sound like anybody else, even close.
Wow, that's the ultimate compliment. Thank you very much, and I'm a fan of your playing as well.
Oh, thank you. So I kind of want to just start at the beginning. I know you're from Alaska, which is really interesting to me. How was it growing up there with music? Were you checking out records, radio? Did you start playing at a pretty young age?
Not really. Okay, my parents were only 20 years older than me. So I was born in 65. My first movie as, really tiny newborn was a Beatles movie. And they were kids. My folks were kids when they had me. And my dad, was a DJ, a local Fairbanks, Alaska DJ. And so music was all around the house. And he was a big, obviously, Beatles fan, but he was also a fan of Buddy Holly, Little Richard, Chuck Berry. My first concert when I was 11 or 12 years old was Chuck Berry.
Wow.
There wasn't very many acts touring up there. And I knew how much my dad was a huge fan. So I went with him to the show. It was great. Chuck was on fire. It made a big impression. But I was into sports. The guitar was another toy in my room. It was like there was baseball and basketball, football, and a guitar.
Yeah. And tell me about some of the first blues you heard.
Well, I do remember seeing John Hammond play a solo show in Fairbanks.
All right.
And that really made a big impression on the intensity of it. But I wasn't really playing, I could barely tune the guitar.
Yeah.
I could play all the cowboy chords. I could play a Chuck Berry rhythm. But I really didn't, I didn't know what I was doing. It wasn't until I got into college. I went to the University of Redlands, which is about an hour and a half east of LA. And I played basketball for 4 years, Division III, no scholarship.
What position?
Guard, point guard, and two guard, off guard.
All right.
Well, mostly off guard, because I was one of those classic, like, overachieving, not very fast, can't jump, but I could shoot and handle the ball real well, So
Cool. Did you play tell me about of the league you were in and some of the teams you played. Did you play any famous players over the years?
I didn't play against any famous players in our league, but I did. Greg Popovich coached the team out at Pomona when I was at Redlands. None of us knew at the time that he was going to go on to be the coach that he became. And a friend of mine from Alaska, Mike Dunlap, ended up coaching the Charlotte team in the NBA a few years ago. Michael Jordan hired him, and so there's some definitely some basketball connections.
Yeah.
Limited and small as the scene might be, in Fairbanks, Alaska, on a winter night, there's nothing more exciting than being in a small gym that's packed.
Yeah,
and a bunch of people with, that love the game, and also that it's like the number one thing, most exciting thing going on that night.
Sure. Now, so, I know from experience that basketball and guitar playing can be a risky combination on your fingers. Did you ever have any problems, or did you really start gigging after college?
So what happened was I played 4 years at Redlands, and some friends of mine had a band, and I would come see them play at parties and stuff. And maybe at the end of the night, I'd pick up the guitar and I'd play a little bit. Dude, you play? Why don't you play with us? And they had a really good guitar player named Roy Bauer, who he graduated 1 year ahead of me. And so I always said, like, no. And then senior year, I ended up joining that band with another friend of mine named Tom Nevins. And not really we played parties for beer and stuff. And it wasn't until the end of my senior year, when basketball had ended, like at the end of February or early part of March, that I knew that I really started getting into playing. So I was almost 21 years old.
Got it. And did you seek out some of the famous West Coast blues players pretty soon after that, or did that take a while?
No, it would happen right away. I mean, I had a fake ID my senior year, and so my friend Tom and I went to see James Harmon at the Lighthouse. So I saw Stephen Hodges play drums and Kid Ramos on guitar. Unfortunately, Hollywood Fats had passed away.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. And then I graduated and moved to LA, and just I sought out everything I could. A lot of times I didn't know what it was. It was just, it could be blues, stone blues, it could be jump blues, it could be sort of something that was roots rock oriented, but it was all blues based.
Yeah.
And I started going to some of these, I would basically just seek out the most authentic thing I could find. So I started going to Smokey Wilson's Pioneer Club. I started going to the Pure Pleasure Lounge. I started going to Babes and Rick's. And I would just, I'd pay my few dollars at the door, get my little ticket. I'd get a fried chicken dinner and a Budweiser. And I would milk that as long as I could, because I had no money,
Yeah. Were you working after college? Did it take a while to get what'd you get your degree in?
I got my degree in business and a minor in political science, but I started working as a freelance writer right out of college for various, I was like a stringer at a couple of different magazines and
I see.
Freelancer. It's a long story, but it's not worth telling in this thing, but it was exciting because I didn't have a 9-to-5 job. And so I could work in my own hours, and then I could go, a lot of times I would go see a band, and I'd have a Telecaster or a Down Electro in the trunk of my car. And on the break, I'd run out to the car and grab my guitar and sit there and try to learn what I'd seen. It might have been Smokey or Junior Watson a lot of times, Alex Schultz, Joel Foy.
A lot of great players.
Yeah, and then one summer of '88, I went back to Alaska and worked for a few months helping my dad out. and there was a band in Fairbanks called the Flyers, and there was a guitar player named Curtis Cunningham, and Curtis was one of the first people to let me sit in. And so I you know how that is when you're first starting to sit in with a band, and it's just so nerve-wracking but so exciting.
Yeah.
And shout out to Curtis for letting this green guitar player get up on stage with him.
Talk about the Lighthouse for a minute, because actually just last night I was listening to Lee Morgan live at the Lighthouse.
Yeah.
So many great records have been recorded there, and it was a legendary venue.
By the time I got into it, Dave, it wasn't so much of a jazz club as all kinds of music type of place. I mean, I knew they still had some jazz shows. I know that years before, 10 years or 15 years before I went, I know Hollywood Fats would play down there with Jimmy Witherspoon, and
Wow.
The jazz thing was still going in the 70s and the 80s, but
Yeah.
but by the time the late 80s, early 90s came around, it was a place I would go to see all kinds of bands.
Yeah. Talk for a while, if you wouldn't mind, about the quote-unquote West Coast scene, specifically style of guitar players.
The Central Avenue, Los Angeles scene is really, not enough people know about it. And there was all kinds of great music out here, and great labels, and artists that live here. All kinds of artists moved out here for Lowell Folsom, Pee Wee Creighton, T-Bone Walker.
Yeah.
Sam Cooke lived out here. Ray Charles lived out here. And then you have Charles Brown. And so you got those guitar players like Johnny Moore, Oscar Moore.
Yeah.
And that whole style of playing was rooted in Texas, and obviously up into Chicago too, but a lot of it was happening in LA. And I think it rubbed off on guys like Pee Wee Creighton and Lowell Folsom, and obviously T-Bone came out from Texas too. And then I think that Fats may have been one of the first players to come back and really get very knowledgeable about the history of the music, rather than, like, say, he might have been influenced initially by the Bloomfields and those type of Claptons and type of that players, but he really went back, and so did Junior Watson, and then up in the Bay Area, little Charlie. But for me, when I came along, it was kind of like Watson was the man, and still is in that style of playing. He was the most. First of all, his tone was, you could sit anywhere in the room, and the sound of that would just blow your mind. And there was another guy named Steve Samuels.
Yeah.
The guy, he had a part of one arm that he picked with, and he fingered with the other arm. And as far as tone, man, Steve Samuels and Junior Watson just blew my mind.
Do you remember their rigs specifically, what they were playing through?
Oh yeah, Steve Samuels' rig when I saw him, was a Dan Electro with 3 pickups that he got from Junior, that Steve Sost kind of helped put together. Dan Fort now owns that guitar. I mean, I know so much about Steve Samuels that I know where his gear is, man. And he would go from that into a Boss DM2 analog delay, into a reverb tank, into a 310 Bandmaster. And because he was picking that Dan Electro with that nub, so it was all flesh.
Wow.
And then the gain of that 310 Bandmaster it's a really gainy amp. But because he doesn't have a lot of pick, hard edgeness to the note, it was just this glorious, warm, enveloping, like oil dripping out of a can kind of tone.
Is there a video on YouTube of him? Do you know?
Yeah, there's a few videos of him playing with William Clarke, maybe a year or so before I joined William Clarke.
Got it.
And then Junior would be playing all kinds of different guitars. Every time you went to see him, he'd have different guitars. But the one that really blew my mind back then was this black Harmony Silvertone Esplanada. It was like a big black archtop with metal binding and these silver, like prehistoric P90 pickups. And he'd have like a 410 bassman, or maybe two of them, and a reverb tank.
And talk about some of your first gigs with people. Like, was William Clarke your first big gig in the blues, or were you playing with Johnny Dyer before that?
No, William Clarke was my first gig, and you know, I was just going out to see him, and James Harmon and Rod Piazza and Smokey Wilson and people like that. And one night I went and sat in with them, and my friend Zach Zunis, I met Zach that same night, and Zach and I both sat in because we could sort of sense that William Clarke was hard on band members, and not everyone was sticking with him for a long time, and he was starting to tour more. So Zach was way more advanced guitar player than I was at the time. He'd already been a professional player. He's still a fantastic player, but
yeah,
right then he was ready. So he got the call. I was devastated. He went out and did a tour with Bill, and then a few months later, the piano player couldn't do it anymore, and so they got both of us to do the tours.
Oh wow!
So that was a really important gig, and I should mention and thank William Clarke, because I was really green, Dave, man. I don't even know what he could see in me at that time.
How old were you then, Rick?
I was 23.
Wow.
And I had really only been playing for 2 years.
Wow. Well,
you know, really practicing and playing, you know.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, everybody obviously in the band was better than me. And we immediately started touring. He got signed to Alligator like right after I joined the band. He put me on one song on a record that was basically done because he wanted to do a nice thing for me. And when we would come home, a lot of times we'd play 3 nights a week, like maybe Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I don't remember, at a place in Redondo Beach called the Starboard Attitude. And that's where Finest Tasby, Johnny Dyer, Smokey Wilson, Louisiana Guitar Red would show up. And I'm leaving a whole bunch of them out, you know.
Sure. And
so we'd do an opening set, and then we'd have these guys sit in, and it was just such an education.
Yeah, I bet. What was your rig back then, Rick?
I had one for a while. I had a black Silvertone archtop that I was trying to copy Junior. That lasted for a few months, and then I bought a 1949 Gibson ES 150. It's like a full size hollow body with no cutaway and one P90, and I had a tweed bassman and a reverb tank.
Wow, cool. Did you ever I once had, actually more than once, I'd have problems playing. I used to use a tank in a basement too. Sometimes the reverb tank would pick up radio signals in certain rooms.
I think that might be more of a Midwest to East Coast thing. Maybe the wiring's just older there. I haven't had that problem here.
Yeah, it was great playing at Buddy Guy's, and then all of a sudden you'd hear like a Mexican radio station through my amp.
Oh yeah, especially like the old Buddy Guy's location. That guy Dave, the sound man there, he's somehow always figured out a way. In fact, Dave saved the day one time on a live record. Did I ever tell you that story?
I think you did, yeah.
Well, I'll tell the people. So we're getting ready. I'm fast forward a few years. I'm playing with Mavis Staples. We're getting ready to record a live record at the Hideout Club in Chicago. I mean, literally, like we are about to start taping, and I've got this buzz that I can't get rid of. No ground lift, nothing will stop it. And the recording engineer goes, I don't worry, I got a buddy. He's on his way with something. Don't worry about it. So I go upstairs. I meet Jeff Tweedy for the first time. You know, I'm talking to him, but I'm totally stressed.
Yeah.
And I run. They say, Dave, the guy's here. You know, he's got something for you. And I see Dave, the sound man from Buddy Guy. So what are you doing here? I got this. They called me to come down, and it was the first time I'd ever seen one of those debuggers.
Yeah, the hum debugger.
Yeah, and he hooks it up and boom, it's like 5 minutes later, we're recording this record that ended up getting nominated for a Grammy, and some people consider it a really good live record. And man, thank you,
Yeah,
Dave from Buddy Guys.
right on. Yeah, I'm in touch with Dave. I'll tell him. Yeah, that hum debugger pedal, I have two of them, and they're lifesavers.
Yeah.
And I've had people, I won't name names, but some pretty famous players shake their heads. No, I don't even want to try it. And they're, to me, I think I have a pretty good ear for tone, and I don't really think they affect your tone that much.
No, I don't, especially in the heat of a live gig. Maybe if you're recording, you might hear some weird, I don't know, it's possible, but they've always worked for me. I don't like to use them, but I'll use them if I have to.
I hear you. So take us through some of your next gig experiences and bands you were in after William Clarke.
Okay, so I spent 3 years with William Clarke, touring like crazy, practicing like crazy just to survive. Like I was really afraid I was going to get fired because I couldn't play.
Yeah.
And he would hear me. We'd have a room next to each other or something, and he'd go, "Hey man, I heard you practicing. I heard you practicing to that Big Walter stuff or that Sonny Boy. I could tell you were practicing. I appreciate you doing that." But the thing with Bill was it was never like we never played a Sonny Boy song or a Little Walter song or a Jimmy Reed song. It was like, "Gee, like Jesus." You didn't know what was coming. You had to guess from his body language. I mean, he was very much about playing the music in the moment, even though he was a traditionalist musically, he didn't want it to sound sterile, which is like a terrible thing if you can barely play. And so I had to get up to speed really fast. Eventually I left William Clarke's band in '91. I started playing with people like Janova Magnus and Johnny Dyer, San Pedro Slim, Linwood Slim, and then occasionally sitting in with Rod Piazza when Alex Schultz would go off for a weekend or something, vacation. And Al Blake a little bit, from the Hollywood Fats band. I mean, a lot of people. And there was a period there where there's a promoter named Randy Chortkoff that eventually had a label called Delta Groove. But back then, before he had the label, he's a harmonica player, and he was always bringing in all kinds of artists from Texas or Chicago. So I played with Billy Boy Arnold, recorded a record with him. I don't know, Snooky Pryor and Big Daddy Kinsey.
Cool.
A whole bunch of people like that, just learn their song. Oh, a Lefty Diz. I'm a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
And that also was a really good experience. But then I really developed a friendship with Johnny Dyer during that period, and I wanted us to get more gigs. So I brought us in the studio thinking we needed to make a cassette tape to mail out to these clubs to get gigs. And the session went really well. And, I paid for it. I was producing it. And my first experiences in the studio weren't all that great because I didn't like the sound. Like I would listen to these old records that I like, and I'd come listen to the playback and it sounded completely different. And finally I started going like, why are all the mics right up on top of shouldn't we pull them away a little bit? Because I think that's what they did. I didn't know. I wasn't an engineer or anything, but we did that on the Johnny Dyer stuff. And I played it for Rod Piazza, and he says, "Oh man, you could put this out. I mean, you should send this out to some labels." So, I used the cassettes to get us gigs, but then I remember sending it to Hammond Scott. I think it was like a Tuesday or Wednesday. Monday morning, Hammond Scott woke me up early in the morning and said, I want to sign y'all. And, in fact, I want it to be, I'm going to bill you on the record too. I was just like, wow.
Cool.
So, and then a few months later, we got rejection notices from a couple other labels.
Hey. I mean, at the time, Blacktop was one of the coolest labels in the country.
It was great. And, we went on the road with Johnny for a couple of years, and he had just quit 30 some years he had just retired from being a truck driver. And to him, it was a lifelong dream to be a touring musician.
Nice.
But at the same time, he didn't realize how much work it was. And, he didn't realize that you're in a van and you're bouncing along and your back's going to hurt. And pretty soon it became kind of obvious that it was ripping Johnny up, that he was, plus he didn't really know how to pace himself all that well. So he'd have a good time, and then we'd have 4 more gigs in a row or 5 more in a row in different towns. So next thing I know, a couple years into touring with Johnny, I get a call from Rod Piazza asking me to join because Alex Schultz had quit. And, I called Johnny. Honestly, I started crying, man. I could hardly get the words out of my mouth. Johnny, Rod asked me to join the band. I think I better, yeah, Holmes, you better do that. Basically Johnny told me, like, I'm just as happy playing for friends locally as I am being out on the road. You should get out there with that band that Rod has and make a name for yourself. And so I did.
Wow, great. And how long were you with Rod?
Just Rod for 7 years, from 95 to 2002. And we recorded, I co-produced 3 records with Rod on the Tone Cool label, which kind of led me to getting signed with Tone Cool. So then I made a few, and that was a great experience. That was an amazing band. We're winning Band of the Year Handy Awards, which are now Blues Music Awards.
Right.
And very fun. And again, playing with a bunch of people that were better than me. So every night I was having to hang on. It was like a guy hanging on to the side of a cliff, every night.
Really? Even at that point in your career, you still felt that?
Oh, I knew that. I mean, all I have to do is go back, and there's videos of me playing with Rod in anywhere from 95 to about 98, 99, where I just, I was trying too hard. I was too much energy. It took me a while to settle down, and because really I should have been. I really should have been in a band playing on the corner. And somehow or another, I just lucked out into these gigs.
Wow.
And we played a lot, which made me better. And I worked really hard, but I honestly didn't deserve it.
Now, I'd heard stories about Rod, and I don't know if they're true, that he was very much a purist, especially when it came to covering other people's music. He really wanted you to be true to the original recordings. Did you find that to be true?
Yeah. I mean, if he was going to play Roller Coaster, or, something by Little Walter, or something by Muddy, like Baby Please Don't Go, he looked at it as like a tribute. Mm-hmm. So, and he had his way of looking at it was, when he came up, he never knew if it was going to be Big Joe Turner or George Harmonica Smith or Shaky Jake Johnny Dyer coming into the club that night. And so, he wanted his stuff to be right. Yeah. He wanted to prove to people that, man, that band, they play that stuff right. Or Jimmy Rogers, somebody like that would show up. And so my experience with William Clarke was different, because Bill Clarke wanted it to be traditional, but very off the cuff and unscripted. Yeah. And Rod was a little bit more like, he came from the tradition of maybe Louis Prima's band and stuff like that, where he really wanted to put on a great show that the average person walking into the club, even if they're not a blues fan, would have to admit that, wow, that band is something else.
Yeah, interesting.
But I will say that also Rod, he wrote his own music, and he and Honey,
Yeah.
you know, there was a lot of their own, they put their own stamp on it. But when he, you're right, when he decided to cover somebody, a lot of times it was like, I was really under the microscope. Like you had to learn, you had to know the mistakes.
Yeah, I've heard that. And I asked that because it was interesting the way you described playing with William Clarke. It's so, you know, much more improvisational and loose. So I know that adjustment must have been something to adjust to.
It was, I mean, it was kind of cool in a way because I loved those records. Like I'm not one of some guitar players that play with harp sort of begrudgingly learn that stuff, and because they want the gig. But I actually love Louis Myers and Robert Jr. Lockwood and Jimmy Rogers and Luther Tucker and Pat Hare and Willie Johnson. I mean, I'm all into that stuff. I can, like Little Walter, to me, I can listen to Miles Davis 1 minute and Cannonball Adderley the next minute and Bob Dylan the next minute and Little Walter, and they're all of the same cloth to me, you know?
Yeah, cool. So can we jump ahead, Rick, to the beginnings of how you got the gig with Mavis? I heard that you may have told me that there is a Ry Cooder connection.
Yeah, I mean, so when I was with Rod, we started recording for Tone Cool Records, and I put out a couple of records on that label. And there was a young guy named Dave Bartlett that worked there. And before he was at Tone Cool, he used to work for Rounder. And he told me a story about, you know, he was like a young guy at Rounder, and he heard my record called Look Out playing in the warehouse. And he's like, who's that? What's that? So he was kind of a fan when he moved from Rounder to over to Tone Cool. And he had a big hand in my being basically green lighted to make this record called Hydraulic Groove that was a little bit departure. So I'm trying to make this as short as I can, but basically this guy, Dave Bartlett, went into management not long after that. And his first client was Mavis Staples. And Mavis didn't really have a whole lot going on right then, which is shocking.
Yeah.
Considering who she is. But, you know, she had always been part of the Staples Singers. She had never really pursued the solo career that strenuously. Like people had released records on her, but it wasn't like Aretha, who was always Aretha. So so he starts managing Mavis, Dave Bartlett does, and you know, he didn't like the band that she had at the time. They were good players and everything, but he kind of felt like they weren't really fitting the music that Mavis was making. And Mavis was out in Los Angeles recording a record with Ry Cooder. And my band opened for Mavis on the Santa Monica Pier. There's like this concert series that happens on Thursday nights in the summer, and it's free. And there's thousands of people that come out on the pier to watch these bands. So, you know, we're doing our 45-minute set, and I think we're done. And I look over at the promoter off to the side of the stage, and he's saying, like, keep going. And we must have played like 20 minutes more. And finally I'm looking over at him, and it's like, okay. So we find out that Mavis's band flew in that day, which was really stupid. I don't know why they did that. And they were late. They were stuck at LAX. And, you know, the show's got to go on. Can you play with Mavis until they get here? So, you know, I go back in this little tent behind the stage, you know, start talking to her, you know, can we just do some blues? I don't sing no blues. I'm thinking to myself, the hell you don't, you know, but we found 3 or 4 songs that we could play. I know we played The Weight, and you know how it has that that 3 chord in it, you know. I slurred through that. I couldn't remember what that chord was, like the whole song. I just I played little fills. And while we were playing with her, there was this guy off to the side of the stage with these big yellow glasses and kind of a strange looking outfit. And he kept yelling stuff up up at me, like on the steps leading down off the side of the stage. So her band shows up, and we literally handed them instrument cables and drumsticks. They finished off the set, and as I'm walking down the steps, this guy taps me on the shoulder, and it's Ry Cooder.
With the big yellow glasses.
Yeah. And Ry liked the way that we played with her, even though we didn't really know the songs, and kept mentioning us in the studio the next day with Mavis and the record company guy, Andy Culkin. And when that record came out, they asked us to back her up.
Wow. Well, I wanted to also talk about your solo records, especially Hydraulic Groove, which, you know, is so highly regarded and being such an original record. So maybe before we go on to getting the gig with Mavis, you could take us back to the making of that record and the concept behind it.
Okay, well, I made a solo all instrumental record in '96 on Blacktop called Lookout.
Yep.
And fast forward a couple years, I started doing some gigs around town, trio gigs, mostly singing, forcing myself to sing. And because I realized, you know, I'd better try to learn this skill if I can. And so I made a record called Gonna Get Wild that was on Tone Cool in 2000. And right around the time that I made that record, this guy named Andy Culkin played piano in a lot of times in my band, and he was working for a record company called Epitaph, and they had a spinoff called Anti Records. And one of the things they were just doing is distributing Fat Possum. And they had R.L. Burnside on their label, Fat Possum. So Andy decided to produce a R.L. Burnside record where he brought my band into the studio, which was at the time was Steve McGallion on drums, Jeff Termas on bass, myself on guitar, and then we also brought Smokey Hormel, our friend, on slide guitar and, you know, second guitar. And we made a bunch of tracks for RL, basically, you know, like where Andy would say, he'd play a Slim Harpo, or he'd play an Aretha song, or a Blind Willie Johnson song. And we would just play in our style, but kind of off, you know, with our tones and stuff and the way we played. And then they took that stuff and cut it up and sometimes looped it. Sometimes, a lot of times they would loop the drums and then they'd put pieces of us back over top of it.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool thing. I mean, it was really exciting. It was like taking the hip hop recording techniques and electronica music techniques of sampling and making break beats from old records, from drums, and then putting stuff on top of. Like one of the bands that Andy played me was a band called Saint Germain, and they had a really cool track where they took John Lee Hooker's voice and guitar, you know, but they put it over this, like, you know,
Yeah.
you know, beat. And so Andy started talking to me about making a record myself doing that, but trying to bring in elements of West Coast blues into it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like on songs like Pee-wee's Nightmare or Tell Me, I think we really captured that. Now, I was still playing with Rod Piazza when I made that record, and I was scared about what we were doing because it was not sounding like the stuff I was playing with Rod or that I was known for.
Sure.
And in retrospect, I really wish that we, like, maybe 2/3 of the record is kind of trippy and loopy, and they got DJs to play or to remix some stuff. We got John Medeski from Medeski Martin Wood to be on a couple of songs, and then there's like these 3 or 4 songs that just sound like they could be on the record of mine before. Like they almost sound like stuff I'd cut with Rod or with Johnny Dyer.
Wow. Cool.
And that's my fault because I was scared.
Yeah.
You know, but the connection with Mavis is that Dave Bartlett, who became Mavis's manager later, was excited about our fearlessness, I think, in making that, even though I was scared. I mean, just the fact that we did that. And that record was pretty polarizing at the time in the blues world. You know, there was, especially for me, because I came from such a traditional background, that it was like, you know, geez, you know, aliens have abducted Holmstrom. You know, he's completely lost his mind. And to me, it was just another record. Like, I didn't play or sing any differently on that record than I normally would. It's just that they took the backing stuff and made it different.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, I can see how the traditional blues people would freak out at something like that. But
yeah, and you know, it was, but the crazy thing about it was that I gained probably 5 times as many fans as I lost, and eventually I really got the Mavis gig because of it. Because
yeah,
Dave Bartlett immediately, as soon as he started managing Mavis, thought, I think I could put Mavis together with Rick as her guitar player and band leader, and that might make a good team. And lucky for me, it happened.
Yeah. How soon after that Santa Monica gig did it happen?
Not long. I mean, that Santa Monica gig was summer of 2006, and by the spring of 2007, I was, you know, we were working with Mavis.
Cool. And did you, because she's always lived in Chicago, I believe. Did you and the band fly in for rehearsals, or how did you first start getting it together?
No, we were, at the time, everybody in the band was in LA. So Mavis and Yvonne came out to LA, and that first time we rehearsed with her, she sang so hard for like 4 nights in a row. And we were supposed to do a gig under my name at the Cafe Boogaloo in Hermosa Beach, and secretly have it actually be a Mavis gig. Like, it was going to be a warm up.
Cool.
And then the next night we were doing the Tonight Show with Jay Leno.
Wow.
And Mavis got a cold, and she sang so hard 4 or 5 days in a row that they had to cancel that gig. You know, she couldn't go to the Boogaloo. And the crazy thing is that the guy that ran that club kind of told people, he wasn't supposed to tell anybody, but he told a bunch of his friends, and man, it was a bad scene. Like, the trio had to go and play that gig with all these people showing up thinking they were getting a special Mavis Staples show.
Oh man, that's a rough one.
So our first real gig with Mavis was on the Tonight Show.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah, do you remember what tune did you play?
Yeah, we played Eyes on the Prize, and we played it too fast, and you know, too much energy. Again, it took us probably a good year to start really settling into the gig and realizing that we didn't have to play like this little punk blues, you know, high energy kind of.
Yeah.
But I mean, our thing was pretty raw. I mean, what we did, it was just bass, drums, and guitar. And we had Stephen Hodges on drums, and his whole thing is, you know, playing with Tom Waits and John Hammond and all that, was this real rude and crude and raw kind of drum sound.
Right.
And so it took us a while to figure out how to play behind her.
I mean, did you guys think, well, wow, maybe we need to spend a lot of time with some Staples Singers records? Did you, or did you just want to approach it from a whole new perspective?
That's a great question. No, I was a huge VJ record Staples Singer fan. This guy gave me a cassette tape back when I was with Piazza. He heard me playing one of Rod's songs that had tremolo, and he said something like, man, you sounded a little bit like Pop Staples. And this is like maybe 96 or so. And it's like, Pop Staples, really? I didn't know much about him. That just shows how green I was.
Yeah.
And all that VJ stuff just blew my mind. I used to drive around after gigs listening to, you know, Uncloudy Day and all that kind of stuff. This May Be the Last Time.
Yeah.
It was like a really great thing to be driving home from a gig at 2, 3 4 a.m. with that music on.
Yeah.
But so we kind of had that when we started with her, but I just think we were a little too hyped up.
Yeah.
We weren't bad, but it took us a little while to really get it.
How accepting was Mavis in the early days of this, you know, pretty drastically new approach for her band?
She was really cool. I mean, the one thing about Mavis is she has never asked me, you know, put the tremolo on that, or, you know, play that a little bit more. You better study Pops. You know, you better study Curtis. She's never once said anything like that. It's always been, you know, play your soul, like play it. And I think we developed a good relationship in that I think she could trust me that I was gonna try to find the thing that was right for the song. Like a lot of times I'd say, okay, we're doing this such and such song, and, you know, Pops had tremolo on this song. I better do it, you know, and then I might turn it off. And then, you know, 9 times out of 10, Pops knew exactly what he was doing. I mean, 10 times out of 10, he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
Sometimes I can try to play the songs that he played on differently, and it'll work, or sometimes it won't work. But she's never been a stickler for that stuff. It's always been, let's try to find something that is in the now for us.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Mavis well, but she seems like just a very hip and contemporary spirit in a lot of ways, and especially it's fascinating and admirable because her history is so deep.
Yeah, I mean, you said that she's so hip, and I mean, she knows all the songs, all the current songs that my teenage girls know, and then some.
Wow.
I mean, she'll spend more time singing that kind of stuff in airports and airplanes than she will singing old songs. Like for a little while, like a little brief period, we did This May Be the Last Time. I remember rehearsing it in my hotel room with her in Spain, and it's sounding so great, and bringing it to a couple of gigs. And then it just sort of started falling out of the set list. And I said to her, oh, Mavis, you know, are you not digging, you know, last time? I think it sounds great. She's like, it sounds great, but, you know, that was Pops's thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes she has to, you know, there's such a large catalog of music that she could do, and everybody that's a Mavis fan will pitch in their 2 cents about which songs they wish we were doing. But, you know, at the end of the day, she's very much into now. And so, you know, we have to be careful which ones we decide to do.
And I know pretty recently she gave you one of Pops's Strats.
Yeah.
That must have totally blown your mind.
Oh, man. Yeah, we were playing a festival, I think it was the Pitchfork Festival in Chicago.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, we're backstage in this trailer, and she comes walking out holding a gig bag, and comes up to me, and, you know, the whole band's there and a few other people, and pretty soon I start noticing people got their cameras out, and, you know, what's going on? And she pulls this Stratocaster out of a gig bag, and she's starting to tear up, and she says, this was Pops's, and I want to give it to you. And
oh my God.
Yeah, it was, it's a Strat from the 90s that Fender gave Pops, and it has those lace sensor pickups in it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them's dead. And I just recently got a replacement for it, and I need to bring it, once this pandemic is over, I need to bring it to somebody to have it installed. Yeah,
what an honor. And I think that's a good segue into leading us to talk about your gear currently and through as far as I know, when you started with Mavis, were you pretty much playing tellies?
Yeah, I was like, I had a Harmony Stratotone from the 50s. I had a few of those. When I started with her, that was my regular tuning guitar, so that was like half the night. And then I had a Telecaster, a black telly that I tuned down a whole step.
Yeah.
And I used to bring those both on the road for about 2 years with her. And then I finally started just hearing Telecaster more and more. It's like, no, the telly really works. So I brought 2 tellies on the road, in a double gig bag. And most of the time we fly in. I'd say 90% of our gigs have been fly-ins. So I get rental amps. And lately, the thing that really works for me is the reissue Vox AC-15s. They just work. The tremolo really sounds great. I use a MXR reverb pedal and a little boost pedal, and a foot switch that turns the tremolo off and on for the amp, and I'm in heaven.
Yeah. Did you ever think of trying a Jazzmaster or a Jaguar as Pops often played?
Well, when you lent me your Jazzmaster, that was fun. Yeah, I haven't bonded with them, and it's probably because I haven't spent enough time with them. Jeff Tweedy has a great, I don't know if it was like a 59 or 60 Jazzmaster that's just killer. It's like a piano. Like you play that thing and it's I should probably spend a little bit more time with them, but the Telecaster also just works for me because you've got that neck pickup that can sound like Curtis, or if you have enough drive from the amp, you can make it sound like a P90 and like like Chicago blues type of thing.
Yeah.
The middle position is classic soul, and the bridge position is just, takeoff time.
Yeah. Did you ever try Strats?
I did. But I had a couple of Strats. My last one that I had, I sold to Zach Zunis. He played it for a long time.
He's a great Strat player.
Yeah, he's a great Strat player. But the problem with me with Strats is I always ended up sounding like somebody else. So, in fact, I remember one time playing that Strat when I was with William Clarke, and I actually took it off and threw it against a wall.
Wow.
I took it off and I went boom, and because it was so frustrating to me, I couldn't sound like myself. I heard Otis Rush, I heard Anson Thunderberg, I heard Jimmie Vaughan.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get away from those sounds. Whereas like on a Telecaster, for some reason, I'm able to make it sound more like me. I can't.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
That's cool. Rick, any when things get going again, I know Cruel Sunrise, which is a killer double album, which came out in, I believe, 2013, was it?
2012.
2012, yeah. Any plans to do another solo record?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have just recently started recording again, and it's like bandanas on and social distancing.
Yeah.
Drums in a room, bass player in the same room, but about 10, 12 feet away from the drummer, and me behind glass with my amp behind glass.
Wow.
Just started. I have 7 songs in the can now, and I've got another 8 that I'm just itching to record. And it's just been crazy because, financially it's tough. And then I had been touring so much that when I come home off the road, the last thing I want to do is just disappear into the studio with a family.
Sure.
But this thing, it finally just started to gnaw at me so hard that I just found a way to make it to get started.
Yeah, I imagine. Singing with Mavis, I know you do a lot of background vocals. It's got to be beyond inspiring to be on stage with her singing, but then singing background with her. Has she helped you with your own singing?
She's so complimentary and so supportive, even when I don't deserve it. But the thing about Mavis is that as amazing of a vocalist as she is, she also likes singers that aren't great singers, like great singers. She can understand when somebody gets a feeling or has a sound, or like somebody like Tom Petty. You can't mistake him. You hear his voice and
Yeah.
the cool thing about Mavis is that she's hip to that, and but man, but the harder thing has been being with people like Donnie Gerard on the road, or sings background with us, and
Yeah.
you know, had a lot of years with Vicki Randall singing with us, and now Sandra Williams. We had Yvonne Staples with us.
Yeah.
And so I'm standing between Mavis and Donnie now, and before it was Mavis, me, and either Vicki or Yvonne.
Wow.
You know, I've gotten some snake eyes.
Oh, I bet.
You know, you have to, wait, what note are you singing? You know, you gotta know it. You know, you gotta really try this note. Okay, you know, so it's like a crash course. It's been a crash course in harmony singing and just finding parts and
Yeah.
preparation but we really started. Jeff, the bass player, for so many years with Mavis, he and I really started singing because there were nights where maybe a certain background singer was sick or wasn't able to make it to a show for some reason.
Yeah.
And we still had to do the show.
Sure.
So, you know, you find ways to kind of pitch in and gang vocal, make the background vocals just a little thicker sounding.
Yeah. Now, Rick, I know you've done at least, is it a couple tours with Dylan and his band?
Yeah.
With Mavis? And I mean, I've been following you and Mavis for quite a while. There's so many guest appearances and tours with special guests. Can you talk about some of your favorite moments over the years with special people joining the band?
Yeah, I mean, that's been one of the most amazing things. We did 2 summers with Bonnie Raitt, and you know, if you know anything about Bonnie, you know that she's a huge fan of people like Mavis or Charles Brown, and you know,
Sure.
Muddy. You know, she's been a big supporter of John Lee Hooker for years. So every night of those 2 summers of touring with Bonnie, she sat in with us. Yeah, that's rare for the closing headline. Yeah, to sit in with the opener. And some nights we'd see her over there, and she's actually pulling like curlers and stuff out of her hair, like right before she goes on stage. She's like going like this, getting her hair together. So that was a great experience, real family type of thing. And Bonnie is still like tight with she's really a great person, and she's tight with my whole family, and so we love her. And we made some records with Jeff Tweedy. We did a lot of shows with him. We did 2 summers with Bob Dylan. Now that was a completely different thing, you know, like we saw Bob, but there was no sitting in.
Did you get to meet him and talk to him at all?
Yeah.
You got to tell us a Dylan story.
Okay, well, the best one to me was when we were having I forget which birthday it was for Mavis, but it was one of the rare times that we played an indoor gig on that summer tour. And so at soundcheck, they had this cake with all these candles on it, and both bands and the crew and everybody's backstage. The lights are off, and we're just standing there waiting for Mavis and Bob. And then, you know, they had told us early on, her people, I mean, Bob's people basically said, if Bob's around, just kind of make yourself scarce. You know, like, and that was no problem for us. Like, we're not going to bum rush him when, you know, I'm a fan of Bob Dylan, but I'm not going to be one of those people that's, hey, you know, here's my email. You know, that's not going to happen. And so we're standing there waiting, and in comes Bob with a baseball cap and a hoodie, but not the sunglasses, and comes right up to me and Hodges. And he's like, so where's Mavis? And I look at him and I say, she should be here any minute. He's like, oh, okay. And kind of, then he comes back up to me and he goes, this gonna be a surprise? I said, yeah, surprise birthday party. And he goes, ooh, this gonna be good. You know, and then Mavis shows up, and Bob was holding on to a little shopping bag, and he goes, ooh, this gonna be good. You know, and then Mavis shows up, and Bob was holding on to a little shopping bag, that he had bought a top, like a blouse for Mavis, a colorful top that she wore that night. And they hugged and kissed and the whole thing. And then we started singing happy birthday to her. They brought the cake out to her. And I'm standing next to Bob Dylan singing happy birthday to you.
Yeah.
It was the coolest thing. And we had a couple more run-ins, very brief run-ins with him. But there was also a lot of times where I would just pass him in a hallway and, just nod or not even look at him,
Yeah. Wow.
I have a lot of respect for him. I realize that a lot of people find it very strange the way he acts, but the way I look at it is all you have to do is think about John Lennon, George Harrison. Somebody broke in, somebody stabbed George Harrison in his house. So, I mean, people like that, they built up a wall that you have to get through to really get to him. When I was around Bob Dylan, he was really funny, really personable, and everybody's having a great time when Bob's around.
That's great. Well, Rick, I think just got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for doing this, and I hope you're out playing again soon. How's Mavis doing with this? Is she holding up okay?
Yeah, I mean, and same to you. I mean, I hope we're both out playing quick, but it's going to be a while. We know that. It doesn't look good. Yeah. I mean, we were supposed to be on the road with Norah Jones right now.
Wow.
And then it got bumped back to the fall, and then that got, canceled too. So, but Mavis is in her place in Chicago, and we've called her, with the speakerphone going with the whole family a few times, and she seems to be doing well. She says, I've asked her, like, so are you getting out? And at least as of a few weeks ago, she was not going outside. She had people coming over, bringing her stuff. She'd tell me that she would go out on her balcony.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I have to get out and run and hike and stuff, or I'll lose my mind. But somehow she seems really good. She seems good.
Good. And if people, I knew you were, I heard about you doing some teaching recently. Are you still doing that?
Well, I did, I don't know, maybe 20 lessons with various people. And I got way more response than I ever anticipated. And it was kind of like, oh man, I'm not prepared for this. And it's dwindled down, and I'm okay with that.
Okay.
I basically, it was, at the beginning of the quarantine, the lockdown, at least I was trying to figure out how to make myself useful. And all I wanted to really do was make some grocery money and pay some bills and contribute. And it was fun. And there was some of the lessons where people would ask me real specific things that they wanted to learn. And then I would make little video clips for them and email them the clips. And then we would do the lesson.
Cool, man. Let me just take a minute to thank you very much for doing this. Take good care, man. And we hope to see you out on the road soon.
Thank you, Dave. I sure enjoyed it.
All right. So long.